you can find your early adopters by finding the people who just innately, when you listen to them, are talking about things that they want to do. And you can pick up on their mindset, and then bang, you got like
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And anybody want to solve global warming? I was just curious.
You get worried about those hurricanes over there? They coming up to Colorado?
Big problem. Now, I wish they would. Then we'd get a crap load of snow and it wouldn't be so daggum dry right now.
Well, I'll tell folks listening, they could go back to the Dr. Quello episode. If they want to learn how to solve the ag part of that problem, we've talked about it.
There you go. Yeah, episode 123, I believe it was, right?
Sure, I'll take it.
Hey, I'm lucky to remember a guest name after we hit stop on the recording, let alone a number of an episode from 2 or 3 years ago.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So speaking of guests, we do have one. And Ashley, do you have the solution to global warming? I mean, well, I guess you have to understand or decide whether or not there's such a thing, mm-hmm. and then decide whether or not you want to solve it after you've decided whether or not it's such a thing. Because we don't usually go into that here.
And if I had the solution to it and could get everybody to go along with it, honestly, I probably wouldn't be talking to you guys. I'd be out making something happen.
Right. Probably digging a hole or building something or whatever, right?
That is a big thing to try and work on.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
I think actually, in the sake of talking about solving big problems without going fully down the rabbit hole there, I do think Ashley touched something on that, which is a lot of these big problems, it's more about just getting people to agree with the solution than it is coming up with a solution. Get people on board, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
50% leadership right there, right? Just
it is.
Getting everybody on the same page.
That's a great point because I can tell you, again, short rabbit hole, we're going to dip our toe into it. Rugby, or really, you could take it and just say any volunteer organization type of thing. A lot of people come in with, well, my solution will solve world hunger, global warming, make rugby better here in Colorado or whatever. And they get so tied up in their solution that things don't move forward because they become an impediment to growth. And I'd just be curious, Ashley, on from your point of view, when you think about or impediments to your business growth, how have you overcome, like day one?
I mean, I think there's a difference between day one and day 101 when you think about what the impediments are there and kind of maybe thinking about the segue into this, getting people on the same page. On day one, if you're trying to get people on your page, you're probably, missing the forest for the trees because you're focused on like, this is what I want to do instead of learning this is how the thing works. However, at day 101, you should already know what's going on. You should know what works, what doesn't. And you should be, getting people on board with the required changes that have to happen in order to make things better. Because no organization's perfect, right? Fresh eyes in an organization always see things that other people who are used to working in a particular way haven't seen. But fresh eyes also miss things that are happening for a reason because they just haven't built the context yet. Mm-hmm. So not to try and like cop out from a specific day one, what do you do answer. But I think, day one, you listen, you observe, right? You ask a lot of questions about why things work the way they do. And then over time, now that after you've been there a little while, then you start to say, okay, this is what I want to change and why. Right. Mm-hmm. And it should be, if you've done your job right, it should be self-explanatory to the people that work there already. Right. Or that are already part of that team. Cause like, they're like, yeah, like that's the same issue I've been having.
Well, let's hit on that though, because, the early adopter for any business, any solution, it is extremely critical. Those people that I guess generally have a higher risk tolerance or a higher trust in the individual. How did you find some early adopters when you started off?
So I guess the first thing is learn a little bit how to read people. But maybe the more important thing is just genuinely listen to what people say, and you'll be able to pick up on, oh, maybe Otis is really leaning into, like, I want to do this and I want to do that, and I want to get after this and that, and is pushing, and maybe Cam's more of the brake on things, right? And there's a place for both of those, right? We wouldn't have brakes on a car if all we needed was gas, but you can find your early adopters by finding the people who just innately, when you listen to them, are talking about things that they want to do, and you can pick up on their mindset, and then bang, you got like okay, I'm gonna pitch this to the person that I know wants to try things. We're gonna go see if it works, and we're gonna de-risk it for the person who wants to who wants to be a brake on things, by either being able to do this in a sandbox where we're not going to hurt anything for the business, or being able to put some guardrails on it such that, any risk is maybe appropriately mitigated, right? Because risk is good, it's necessary, but risk for the sake of risk is not always the best thing.
Could you talk some, Ashley, about, and the term that's coming to mind is just calling people out on that? Because what I'm picturing is the amount of times I've been, whether out coaching rugby or in a different environment, where you say something and you can hear the tone in people, and you can hear, and I feel like a lot of leaders will kind of brush over it. You talk about, it's like, okay, I can tell that you're not all in on this idea. I can tell you probably don't understand. And a lot of people just go, hey, no questions? Okay, well, good, we're moving on. How do you personally drill into those a bit more without, I guess, maybe ostracizing those people, but I guess maybe that's not that much of a risk anyway. So,
I don't think you risk ostracizing people unless you're a jerk about how you present it.
yeah,
Right? Like, you ostracize people when you tell them it's not okay for them to disagree with you. But if, if you're my rugby coach and you're like, hey, I want you to change up positions. I get it. You've been a back your whole time. I think you'd make a great forward. I want to put you in at flanker, right? Just as an example, which has happened to me playing rugby. Initially, I was like, wait a minute. Like, what do I do? And they're like, dude, you know what to do. You've played alongside these guys. Like,
yeah.
I need you to step up. Maybe I have some trepidation. Maybe I don't. But if you just say, hey, okay, like, what's up? Tell me what you're thinking about it. And you make it okay for them to give you their feedback, and you make it a conversation, then it's usually all good. If you make it not okay, like you're going to be judgy when they say it, or you're going to be like, nah, that's silly, or like, nah, like, let's not do that, or just do what I say because I said it, before you've built trust, because you can say all those things after you've built trust. But if you're still in that building phase, just make sure that it's okay for them to share it. And I've seen the same thing with, like, time in the military, time in business. I remember, like, I had this guy, Adam, who used to be in my platoon, and I don't even remember what task I gave him, honestly, right now. But I remember his response to it was, well, like, okay, got that, sir. But, like, what if we did it this way? And I just stopped, thought about it. I was like, yeah, like your way's better. Like, do that. And just the act of doing that, one, got us a better result, but it also meant that, like, Adam felt trusted. He felt like, he felt like I would listen to him. And we had built trust. Like, we'd known each other for almost 2 years at that point, but it made it into a relationship that was much, much better. Right. And that'll percolate out through the organization, because once somebody has trust in you, they're going to tell two friends, and they're going to tell two friends, and so on.
I think there's a piece I'd love to drill in there, which is getting that feedback from folks. It requires, and you already said this, Ashley, it requires them having enough of an understanding as they're coming in to also, say the right things, not just be completely off base with, their suggestions and those ideas. What's your technique for measuring that person has an actual understanding? Because people who don't understand, they'll look you in the face and yes, sir, and act like they understand. And that's a pretty common thing. So how do you tease that out?
Questions, honestly. And I wish I could tell you that I had innately had this in me, but it was actually taught to me when I was first joining the Marine Corps, and they're teaching you how to create orders, right? How to make sure your orders are understood. And by orders, it's not telling somebody do this right now. It's how to create a plan, right? They talk about getting a back brief. In the Army, they often call it a brief back. But you're saying, okay, tell me what you understood from what I just told you. And how I ended up taking that to things like what you just mentioned, Cam, of, making sure that this person understands the situation is you just kind of ask more questions. Okay, tell me more. Why is that? Okay, I don't quite see that. What am I missing that causes that to happen? And as you start to dig in there, you quickly realize, and we've all had teachers that do this, for example. You'll quickly realize, you'll see them realize where the gaps in knowledge are. Right? It's for that exact reason why it's I remember this from high school, but one of my teachers told us something you remember, let's call it 5% of what you read, or 10% of what you read. You remember 20% of what you hear, 50% of what you discuss, and 90% of what you teach. And it's because when you have to go and explain it, you start to realize where your gaps in understanding are. And you can use that same technique just by asking questions about it and soliciting more questions from them about whatever it is you want to understand.
So how did you take that methodology? Because that's very true. I don't remember the exact numbers, but there's a lot of truth to if you really want to learn something, you teach it. I'm a walking example of that. Never the best at it, but pretty good teacher at it.
I was gonna say, I got to point out the example of coaching rugby. What, you coached 7 years, 6-7 years before you played your first game? You're pretty decent in that first game.
Yeah. I had a different vision of how I should, the speed I should be moving, though. I can tell you.
Yeah, you tapped out about 10 minutes in, I saw.
Yeah. The reality of the experience of doing it. But what I was getting to is, well, how did you go from Marine knuckle dragger, dude under a rucksack, to now IT, cybersecurity, all that? Who'd you teach?
So I think there's who I taught and there's who taught me, or what I learned. And so maybe just to answer the who did I teach, I would like to think that I taught the people that I've worked with how to, not necessarily, I don't want to say how to do things on their own, but how to be good teammates, right? Which is a little bit of, knowing when to be a chief, knowing when to be an Indian kind of thing. Also I like to think that I've taught people how to organize a team around shared goals by divvying up whatever their share of the task is and making sure that they understand why it's important. And I like to think that I've been able to teach people a bit about how to, how to do two things when it comes to planning. One is being able to create a plan with very little guidance that is broad enough to be applicable still when it inevitably changes. And then the other one is being able to take a good pause and recognize when there's a benefit to detailed planning, just for the not because that plan is inevitably going to be followed, right? So the old Eisenhower adage, right? Like the plan being important, like the plan not being important, but the planning being important because it brings everybody together. And how to foster that shared understanding of what we're doing, right? And what the people to your left and right are doing. I think if anything, it's been those things. And that's what's let me go from, a career in Marine Corps doing Force Recon and MARSOC to tech, because it's still people, it's still teams, right? And everybody's got their thing. No one person can do it all.
I think the underlying thing there that you touched on is being a confident enough leader to know you're not the smartest person in the room and to recognize the smart people in the room. You mentioned Adam earlier in your platoon and how he had this idea of a different way of approaching it. I think that right there is what you brought to the table. How did you overcome though the fear of not being the IT expert? You got Bubba the coder who goes, "Hey Ashley, this code says we ought to do blah blah blah, and it's going to take me the BS meter, because you got to understand some of it, right? What's the BS meter and how you develop that?"
I think the only answer to how you develop the BS meter is study and learn, right? And you can also you can accelerate that by just kind of your gut feel for like a person. I could give you like this is a military example, but it's pretty germane. Like when I first got to my platoon, as I was a lieutenant in Force Recon, which is uncommon. Most of my guys were way senior. I'd been in the Marine Corps not even 2 years, and they've been in for 10, 15 years, some of them, right? And one of this guy, John Primer, he was one of my team leaders. He saw me working till 10 at night every night. He's like, "Hey, sir, you realize we can do a lot of this, right?" And the light bulb kind of clicked for me. These guys know a lot more about this stuff than I do, right? I need to. There's decisions I need to own, but there's stuff I need to trust them on, and so I started trying to learn from them the ins and outs, instead of trying to just fall back to what I had learned in training up until that point. And I think the same thing would be applicable to the tech sector, with what I'm doing right now with cybersecurity stuff and DevSecOps. My job is not to write the code. My job is to be able to explain what's going on in layman's terms. And I've found that people are pretty willing to go talk about something they're passionate about and explain it to you. And they may get a little impatient if you're like, "Hey, can you explain that for the 10th time?"
Right.
But most of the time they'll explain it to you. And if you couple that with just a little bit of outside study, go look up what is DevSecOps? What are these programs that they're doing? What are these programs that they're running? As soon as they pick up that you know a little bit, they want to give you more. And that allows you to accelerate your path to being able to sniff out a little bit of BS or things like that.
I'm curious, and Dad, and maybe get your opinion on this too, but Ashley, talking about the, getting the ideas from the team, being open to that, a lot of the barrier to that for folks is the ego, right? I have to be the boss, and therefore I can't take their ideas because then they're going to overshadow me, all of that. I understand that. As we're talking here, I'm starting to wonder, though, if there's any truth to this, that there is still a value to, or a danger there, rather, to not looking like the leader. In the sense of you're letting all these people come up and it's they're running free, but then there's a certain point where now you no longer have control over the team, and the team in freedom might be doing their job, don't get me wrong, but there's a certain aspect where things go wrong and now you don't have that ability to step up and get things back in line. Do you think that's a legitimate fear, or is that my ego tricking me?
I think it's a legitimate fear, but I don't think it comes from ego. I think that ego is a barrier. You're absolutely correct. Excuse me. Where I think ego comes into play is ego will slow down the team, right? But there is a healthy medium where you have to exist, that you have to feel out with your people. And so, if you come in and you're like, I know how it's done, it's my way or nobody's way, right? People are going to do the bare minimum to just keep you off their back, right? You don't get that much out of people when all they're allowed to do is what you tell them to do. You get a lot more when they're allowed to run a little bit and they're allowed to take ownership and have ideas of their own. However, at the opposite end of that spectrum, like you mentioned, if you just are completely like laissez-faire and just let things go, what you get is you don't get good progress either, because people are all just working on whatever they kind of want to work on, or deadlines are being missed or whatever it may be. And so the way that I've found best to kind of toe that line is to make it clear, look, I'm not as smart as everybody in everybody's particular specialty. That's okay. My job is to know how they come together, and my job is to make sure that we as a group deliver, which means that there's decisions I got to own. And when it comes time for me to make those decisions, you have valuable input, but I still need to own it. And that a lot of times people will like that too, because it means you own the failure, right? And then when they see that you don't own the success, you give the success to your teams, then you create like a nice pattern where people want to produce more, right? Mm-hmm. They feel valued for their contribution, but they also feel insulated from failure because they're worried about making mistakes too. Did that answer your question, Cam?
Yeah, definitely. Dad, did you have anything to add to that? Because I had another follow-up also.
No, go ahead. I thought that was great.
Okay, so if we're out here, we're selling leadership to some young kids out there that might want to get into leadership roles, and you tell me, Ashley, that I have to own all of the failures and then I need to spread those success out to the team, that sounds like it might put me in a pretty negative headspace and I might not want to be a leader. What's your counter to that?
Get used to it, man. Unfortunately, it's like get used to it. Because that's kind of the role of a leader, right? The leader's job is to make sure that things go well and to look out for the people that are within their team or within their group. And part of that means insulating them from failure. It doesn't mean that there's no repercussions from failure. And it doesn't mean that you as a leader don't have to make hard choices. Like if somebody is chronically underperforming, you're going to have to let them go, right? Because there's a standard that the team is expected to uphold. And you are the person that has to make sure that that standard is being met. Because it doesn't absolve you from that. But it does mean that, it does mean that you have to be prepared to kind of take one for the team when the team messes up. And, I would say the advice that I would give is, like, one, be prepared for it, but two, find organizations that are going to understand that mindset too. The military innately gets it probably to an extreme sometime, right? Like, you see people get relieved of command because some 18-year-old went out and got drunk and got in a car accident. And it's like, well, like, I had no control over that. But it does instill a culture in which the leaders are expected to take responsibility for the mistakes. And when that is the culture, there is an understanding that the mistakes are not always truly your fault, but you're still owning it, right? And you're still going to find a way to correct it. And so, the best way to maybe look at that, in my opinion, is get used to doing it. It is the right thing for your team. And, if you're not okay doing it, evaluate, why do I want to be a leader? Is it because maybe it is just for ego? I want to be the person in charge, which isn't a great reason in my opinion. And then look for organizations that are going to, they're going to respond well to that mindset.
One data point before you go, Dad, just to add to that, because Ash, I think you're totally right. Talking about it's like, well, that is the job. I remember the Freakonomics series of episodes on the secret life of a CEO. I remember that's one of the things they talk about was like, why the hell do CEOs make so much? It's like, because you can fire me and blame everything on me. That's why I make so much, because someone else can completely screw up. People could decide that they don't like Pepsi anymore and we could go out of business, and you fire me and it's all my fault. And that's what I get paid for. It's like, okay, yeah, there's some truth to that.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like the head coach for a sports team.
Yep.
Like, you could have a bunch of injuries and your team could do very poorly for a year and you didn't have a winning season. So now you're out.
Yep.
You didn't do anything wrong there, right? Fate was against you.
Yeah.
100%.
New York Jets head coach fired last week.
Yeah.
My Colorado Avalanche, they haven't started talking about the coach.
The comment section has.
Ooh, but 0-4 start. That's
For a recent cup winner, right?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. People
Was it 26 goals against and 4? That's not good.
Yeah. Well, we've had that discussion about the goalie, anyways, and
Yeah.
the
I was gonna say, Dad, get out of the rabbit hole.
Yep, the starting goalie. I'm just going to say my piece right now. I identified Georgie was not a Stanley Cup winning goalie last year when we brought him on the team. Yeah, he may have won the most games in the NHL last year, but he ain't a Stanley Cup winner. So anyway, wow, let me readjust, get out of my stomping my foot about they got their asses handed to them by the Bruins last night. Back to what I was thinking about before Camden distracted me with the shiny object of my sports team sucking. And we won't even get into the NFL. Oh, come back. All right. Woo.
Cowboys jersey still on the ground. I haven't picked it up yet.
Yeah. One of the things that I'd love for you to explain, in talking about building a team and working with a team, and you touched on this a little bit in the military. It's easy. Everybody's there for a reason, especially when we get into the special ops world, right? We've crossed some gates where we've, raised the hand and said, yes, I want to do this. I want to do this extra stuff. I really want to work hard to get this and I want to get that. Then we take the uniform off and we go into business. We're like, that's an awesome problem that I know I can solve. How did you build that team and make the mental adjustment of, you're no longer the lieutenant or the captain. And those people that work for you, there's no such thing as UCMJ. That would be the Uniform Code of Military Justice, folks. That's how you throw soldiers and Marines and sailors in jail and airmen, although that doesn't really happen. But that's what it's for, is to keep law and order in the military. That doesn't exist in business. So how are you handling that dilemma?
I don't think it's as big a jump as most people maybe would think of from the outside. You're right. There is no UCMJ. There's no rank, right? I mean, I guess they're like loosely is ranked. There's like, positions and titles that people have, but there's not, there's no yes, sir, yes, ma'am, that's going to happen, in the private sector. But I think that the core things are still the same, right? I would say that, like, I can't think of a time when I was in the military that I had to give an order, like, do this because I'm saying so. Everybody always knew. And I think that in the private sector, like, maybe the only thing that's different is there's less universal buy-in on certain things. And there's less universal buy-in on, okay, well, this is gonna suck and it's gonna be a lot of hard work. There's more of a tendency to want to find the smart way and work smarter, not harder, as opposed to a realization that oftentimes there is no smarter, not harder. There's just smarter and harder if you really want to get forward. And so getting the buy-in to do that is, I'd say, where you end up focusing a lot of your time, or where I've focused a lot of my time. And where I've found particular friction is things like planning, right? And putting the detail into planning to really get the team on the same page. That can often be challenging because people just aren't used to it, right? People are used to that in the military. Things like regular written reporting, especially like when everybody went remote for COVID. I was like, oh, cool. I got a template for this. We did this in the service, right? Because, you're deployed. You got a team like on one side of the planet. Your headquarters is back on the other. You got another team in the country next to you, like not like just like down the street next from you. when you do that, you're used to writing situation reports. This is what I did today. This is why it's important. This is what I'm doing tomorrow. Here are my comments as the commander. It doesn't take you too long, but people are not used to doing it. So we went remote for COVID. That was challenging for people. They felt like it was an invasion of their privacy. And so you just had to generate buy-in for it, right? And I think that's the biggest thing. It's just you got to find ways to generate buy-in. You got to spend a little more time listening to and then also kind of explaining your position. And you got to be able to sell it to people a little bit more in the private sector. And it's not because you're giving them orders. It's because a lot of times they haven't experienced it, right? Or there's a way that they're used to doing it. They've been doing it at their company that takes a little bit of time to get used to. And so you're just managing that change slightly differently. Whereas, one of the big advantages the military has is, as a very large organization with tons of tradition, not just of like customs and courtesies, but also of how work is done, people are used to a lot of these things already. Things that really do help make teams run well.
Talking about the buy-in, and I'm curious specifically in the tech industry, because there's a lot of competition. There's a lot of different big businesses they can go work at. They're also, and maybe I'm off on this, I did coding in high school and had one tech company I worked with. But my understanding for a lot of those folks also is there's a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for problem solving, but in a kind of almost like individualistic way of, it's like, I want to get better at this, I want to do this, and there's that kind of thirst there. How do you connect that and get them bought in to something that, like you said, they might not have done before, might be hard, might be all those kind of things, and get that buy-in from the team?
So to me, the way I like to do it is, like, let's say you've got one particular thing that you really like doing, right? Or one particular, type of technology that you're super into. We wouldn't be on the same team if we weren't at least somewhat interested in that same technology. I'm going to try to find out what you like the most, why you like it, and try to put you on a path that lets you do that. And I'm going to be very transparent with you that there are times that you're going to have to pay the man and do something you don't like for the group, but that's going to be the minority of your time, and the majority is going to be spent with us trying to get you working on the thing that you're passionate about, or on the track that you want to go. And what I like to do is stay in regular contact with these people, with everybody, so you can find out if they are progressing. Because if you just say, like, if you came to me and you're like, hey, yeah, like, a year from now, I really want to be, like, better at X, or I want to be on a path where I'm going to be a senior engineer or whatever. And I check in once a year with you, or even twice a year. How am I really going to know? So I like to do it, once every couple of weeks, once a month, and be like, okay, like, making sure that progress is happening, and that makes sure that people feel cared for, that makes sure that people are progressing in the way that they want, which makes sure that they stay bought in.
What's something else? You mentioned SITREP. What's some other tool that you learned in your time in the Marines, and you're using a translated version of it? And I think this is really important because, one of the things that I do, and part of my give back to the veteran tribe, is coaching guys getting out of the uniform. And I hammer them on the fact that they have all the processes and knowledge to succeed in business. They just got to learn the new language. So I'd love for you to share some other tools and processes that you learned as a Marine that you're like, man, this is helping business grow and move and all those good things.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest one, and this is one that I would encourage every single veteran getting out to become familiar with, particularly if you're getting out as like a staff NCO or an officer, where you have some exposure to the planning process, is OKRs. OKRs, objectives, key results, right? A lot of people say they come from Google. A lot of people say they come from, the book Measure What Matters. Doesn't really matter.
Got it on the shelf right there.
Yeah, like it's a great system. I'm going to tell you what, the military was doing it first.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the military's been doing it for a couple hundred years. And they were doing it because they had to, because it came from a place of, I need to be able to tell this military unit that's going off to the other side of the globe when I don't have communication exactly what's expected of them and what success looks like. And what I've found that a lot of civilian businesses struggle with this. And veterans can offer a lot of help here. But they can only offer help as long as they don't say, this is because we did it this way in the military. They can offer help if they come at it from a point of understanding and can guide people towards a point of achieving a clear vision for OKRs, right? Mm-hmm. And so one thing that the military taught me, whether it's, Marine Corps planning process, military decision-making process, jobs, whatever, they all have this mission analysis phase where you're breaking the problem down into digestible chunks. You're looking at who's best able to support them. You're going back and forth with your estimates of supportability from the different groups that are going to support them. And then you're using that to refine what is being asked of those people, right? And you're letting them kind of come up with the things that they think they can do in support of the goal. That whole process does a very good job of generating on the other end actionable tasks that you can achieve in a step-by-step way that get you from A to B, right? That are, to go with the measure what matters, like jargon, they are aspirational yet achievable, right? So like they're stretch goals. They're always like kind of a stretch, but they're within your capacity to stretch. And, you'll find that creates a much better execution on the other end. And anybody from the military recognizes that because we just taught it. You're just brought up with it. And when you come to the private sector, you find that people haven't been taught that. So OKRs are, people come up with them in this ad hoc way of just like, oh, well, what's our goal for next quarter? Oh, let's do this. Okay, well, like, why are we doing that? Right? How is that connected to this other person's goal? How do we break that down so that, your departmental goal trickles down appropriately to that individual engineer who's writing code or designing a piece of hardware, right? Or fabricating something, right? It's like that, the ability to connect that through what we would call in the military as a military planning process, right? Into like the OKR process is something that adds tremendous value, in my opinion. But you have to learn to do it in civilian language and on civilian terms. And then the only other one I would add, and this is for anybody who's getting out, is especially if you come from the soft side, human targeting, network targeting. When you're looking for where you want to go, where you want to work, target the network. You find the nodes you can access, you start talking to those nodes, right? You pull the thread a little bit, you find more nodes, right? And you just keep doing that. And honestly, that's how I kind of found most of my jobs up until this point.
Well, and it's not just job search. Now it's when you're in the job, you're in, CEO of the business. Your job is to sell the business. So now you're using human targeting for a different reason. Who's my next client? How do I build a relationship? Where else do we need to go? All those sort of things. And I'll also say something about OKRs that I think is really important. Is the sense of it's within your span of control. Mm-hmm. It's not the sales cycle is always such a great one to talk about, because you can talk about the probability, from the funnel down to the close, right? If I get 200 people in the funnel and I make this many calls out of that, that means I'm getting 10 closes a week or whatever, right? Well, it's all probability. And the only thing you can control is not the people that schedule a time, but what you say to the people when they schedule a time. And that's an interesting thing to think about that I think is so important in the larger aspect of it also. And I love that you tied OKRs into the military decision-making process. So,
I mean, it's where like if you look at MDMP or pick your planning cycle, right? when you're doing mission analysis, all you're doing is setting up OKRs. That's all you're doing. You're just coming up with tasks to subordinate units, which is all that OKRs are.
Go ahead. Do you have something, Dan?
Nope. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask Ashley. I'm really curious what the kind of common thread is from you going into the Marines and then into the tech space. Is it the leadership aspect there? And then if so, why the hell tech, not something else?
I'll go with the why tech first. When I was getting out of the military, my geography was dictated for me, so I knew I was coming to the Bay Area, and tech is the dominant market here in the Bay Area. I, in particular, targeted startups because startups are just closer to the SOF environment. They're closer to that small team environment in which I was very comfortable. And also startups are a little bit easier to kind of network your way into and get some, in the startup world, you talk somebody into giving you a shot because you have direct access to the decision maker. Whereas
that's right, because they're not as jaded yet from being in a large corporation.
And they also don't have as many checks and balances, right? It's like in the military, if you've got the right job code, the right time and grade, like the right set of things on your list, like bang, like you're the man for the job. In the private sector, in big companies, they operate more that way. And they need to. They need that structure to organize, 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 people. At a small company, and I always think small companies are good for vets too, particularly soft vets, but because they also give you the chance to, get a lot of exposure to different things very quickly. But you really can kind of talk your way into a role that you want based on your unique qualifications or the things that you're passionate about. And so that's kind of how I got into tech in general. And then as you learn more about it, you kind of find where your particular place is going to be. And I think leadership is at a premium anywhere you go. And leadership being more of a soft skill than a hard skill transfers much more readily from one sector to another, because tech is just as tech is a huge umbrella. Like saying tech is almost like saying defense, right? And something that operates underwater is very different than something that operates up in the sky or a satellite or something like that. It's very different environments. And but the ability to lead a team, right, and to provide that leadership is valuable across all of them, as long as you can learn like you talked about kind of earlier, as long as you can learn enough to kind of sniff out what makes sense and what doesn't relatively quickly.
So in that same line, how far back did you say I want to step out and run my own company? I want to found my own company and do it that way because I know I can provide a better solution. How did you? Because that's also a different kind of risk that we step out when we step out of the uniform and then step into entrepreneurship.
Honestly, I wanted to do it straight out the gate. So, you guys familiar with search funds at all? The concept of a search fund?
No.
So, a search fund is essentially one-man private equity. So, you're finding investors to back you with a certain amount of money to go out and find a company, and then they're going to help you put together the deal, right? Put together investors to buy that company with the understanding that you are capable enough to take this business, grow this business, and then eventually, exit the business at a higher valuation. Because that's all private equity is, right? It's like, we're going to buy something, we're going to grow it, we're going to sell it for more. And search funds are really interesting. And I think vets are uniquely qualified to be able to do this because of the leadership experience that you get. But search funds are interesting because they're entrepreneurship for you as the entrepreneur through the acquisition of a company. And I would say that was very interesting to me and remains very interesting to me as something that I would like to do. And it's also interesting because a lot of those businesses are not going to be high tech businesses. It could be a landscaping business. It could be a catering business. It could be a transportation business. I met a guy who did it with like an ambulance business, right? What you're looking at is, is this a solid opportunity, and am I capable enough? And do I like this team that I'm going to buy into enough to grow this thing? But it's a really interesting model. And I think, honestly, the timing of it too makes it particularly interesting right now, because if you look at veterans from the Vietnam era, and even now maybe like the Desert Storm era, who are owners of businesses, who are getting ready to retire, or are looking at and considering the option of retiring, there's a whole bunch of post 9/11 vets that would be well suited to run these businesses. And they're kind of a known quantity. Like, I remember a funny story of right when I moved up to the Bay Area, I met this guy. He works in real estate up here, but he was telling me about getting a job after Vietnam, like coming back to the Bay Area. And I don't even remember what the job was. I just remember he said he went in and he talked to the guy, and the guy was like, "Oh, what do you do?" He's like, "Oh, I was a captain in the infantry in the army." And he's like, "Great, that's awesome. Can you start on Monday?" And like, that was it, because this guy had been a captain, even a field artillery captain, I think in World War II. And he knew what it meant, and like what this person's qualifications were by virtue of having a company command on a combat deployment, and like being a company grade officer with command time. Like he knew what that meant. And so it was a safe, easy bet for him. He knew what he was going to get out of that person. I think you hear a lot of stories of that, like vet to vet, and that makes something like a search fund, right? Or maybe even like the broader PE market writ large, very interesting for people who want to get into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I didn't know that was what it was called. We had a client who, it was 2, maybe 3 years ago, Stefan, retired SF guy who was a search fund baby, I guess,
Okay.
and bought a landscaping company, I think in Tennessee, Nashville area. So exactly like you said, he was hired by the search fund company to find a business that had some parameters. He had some guidance, and yeah, it was a great setup for him. It was a little bit stressful because, finding the right one, think he had it, wasn't right, and all these sort of things.
Sure, there's a lot of ups and downs with it. The people that I know that have done it have all said that there's a lot of ups and downs. But I looked at doing that right when I got out, and for me, it was just the if you're going to do that, you need to open your aperture for where you're willing to live, so you can find the right business. Right? If you restrict yourself to one geography, it's much harder to find the right fit. And I just wasn't in a place where I was going to be able to move, 6 months or a year after I just moved to San Francisco.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I'll also say that that's one of the things that I try to educate guys on, because I know when I was in that retirement transition stage, I thought, you work for somebody or you have a business idea and start a business. I never thought you could buy a business.
You don't think about it, right? You don't think about it. Businesses as a commodity that you can buy.
Yeah. So many other opportunities out there. And I think you're spot on with, for veterans, because what do we spend our entire career doing is taking over a role from somebody else. It's pretty rare that you start a new position, right? And then what's your job while you're in that role to make it better for the next guy?
Mm-hmm. And wouldn't you love to have it so you could take command and then be in command for 10 years instead of 2?
So cool. Yeah. What a great way of putting it. Go ahead, Cam.
Yeah, no, I was going to shift gears, and Dad, that's something we talked about a little, and this definitely falls into that big problems bucket. But Ashley, as you were talking there about, the advantage of the startup, comparing it to the soft community, one of the things that came to mind was a realization I had, years ago of it's like, okay, hey, small things tend to work well. And then there's this size that eventually things stop working well. Whether you want to make the example of business, government, whatever, smaller tends to work a little bit more efficiently in a lot of different ways. That being said, how the hell do you build a big, small company in that sense? A company that operates with those same kind of values while also still being able to solve problems in other areas rather than, if I set it up and I have a small company that does a great job here in Tucson, well, that's great, but how the hell am I going to solve that problem everywhere else? I've got to grow. And at a certain point, that takes the bureaucracy, that takes all those other things that tend to pull the business down. What are your thoughts, Ashley, on how to find that balance?
I mean, the short answer is go read Team of Teams by Stanley McChrystal. If you want a great blueprint, there's a lot more detail in there than I'm going to be able to give here. But it's I think that should be required reading if you want to build a business that's going to work globally and still operate nimbly. But to me, it comes down to building processes for sharing information and for understanding how you're going to delegate decision making, because those are the things that hang people up. Is decisions. Is can I do it? Yes or no? And do I have the information I need to make an informed decision? Right. And the best way the way that I like to think about this is think about like different time zones. Right. So if your business is in Tucson and you're also running a business in, I don't know, like Tel Aviv, you're like nearly 12 hours offset. Yeah. So there's stuff that's coming up during the night when you got to rest that you can't be there for. And so if you build from the outset with a small company, the habits of action to where you're going to share information, ideally asynchronously. I love sit reps, as you could probably tell, because they do this for you. Right. The information is there. And then you're very deliberate when you're doing your planning about saying, these are the things that I'm comfortable with you making the decision, right? And this is the direction I want you to go. You have clear guidance. Go that way. If you need to make a decision that's out of that scope, like wake me up, right? And then these are the key things that I need you to wake me up for if something like goes wrong, is just like a huge decision, whatever. And there's tons of ways you can do that. It can be a dollar amount. It can be like, like a formal partnership. It can be anything that's going to be like publicly posted on the internet. It doesn't, you can figure out what's best for your business. But if you establish those habits of communication and you establish, good delegation of decision making that's well understood and a good intent of where you want things to go, you're going to find that the business can still operate very nimbly, even at great size. Because a lot of the things that are bureaucratic processes are not things that hold businesses up, right? Like, like payroll, like easy to make big and bureaucratic, but payroll doesn't hold the military up. And it's a huge organization. Everybody just gets paid, right? And sometimes there's hiccups and people have like individual ones and twos problems with it. But as a whole, it doesn't tend to bog down too much. What bogs people down is not knowing who to ask when a decision needs to be made.
That's great, and such a good point. And yeah, I was part of the team of teams under General McChrystal. So
like you get it, right? It's like if you work in that environment, there's so much deliberate information sharing. Like you don't understand, people on the outside don't understand how much effort is put into getting everybody on the same page, so that like a unit in one part of the country knows to wait and not hit their target because another target is not developed yet, because those guys happen to be cousins. We don't want them communicating before we're going to roll them up or something.
Right.
And it's the same thing for business. It's like you got to have that information to make those good decisions. And when you have that and you have like clear understanding of who can make what decisions, things will still roll smooth no matter how big you are.
There you go. Left and right limits and thresholds. That's what we always talk about.
Yeah, it's not rocket science. There are templates out there. You just got to figure out how to tailor it to what your business does and the way the personalities work within your business.
Yeah. Well, and no, that's like I feel like T-ball set up for us, 'cause that's exactly what we talk about. And I remember I remember picking up Team of Teams when it first came out, and I think I don't remember the timing or what I was doing at the time, and I'm like, oh, cool, Joe McChrystal, yeah, Team of Teams is a great concept, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, hey, that was me there. That's
He already told me all this.
I'm in this book.
I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. But yeah, and the irony of it is, it's not that hard to do these things. It's all boils down to something you said at the very beginning: trust.
It's trust and discipline, right? Like it's the biggest thing where I've found that I've found to be the biggest challenge with the private sector in achieving that type of team of teams is actually hasn't been trust, it's been discipline. Because in like Otis, I'm sure you'll second this, it does take a certain amount of self-discipline to say, okay, every day I'm going to write this thing and I'm going to put effort into it, even when I'm tired, even when it's a pain in my butt, because I understand the institutional value. It's also challenging to say, I'm going to get on a call in which I'm going to be listening for an hour and a half and I'm going to speak for 30 seconds because it's important for me and my organization. And because I understand I might get a nugget of stuff out of there. I think you get a lot of people in the business world who think that, it's like, oh, this is a waste of time. And when you think that kind of deliberate information sharing is a waste of time, it's very hard to scale. Because once you leave that small, like village size company, information sharing has to be deliberate. But if you're not used to approaching communication with that discipline, then it becomes very difficult to build those habits. It's one advantage, like we talked about before, that the military has, because it instills those habits of action in you from day one. And so everybody's just used to that being the norm. And so you have, like a 12-man soft team that's still having a daily stand-up every day, still going around the horn and getting all of the inputs, all of the context, right? And then you're scaling that up to, I have a theater-wide stand-up, right? Because it's the same system, just applied for like 12 guys and then applied to 1,200.
Do y'all think the resistance, to put it that way, of employees in those kind of organizations who don't necessarily have that discipline or don't see the value there is just that they've worked for people where that isn't valuable? Like it is just checking the box, and so they kind of have this learned helplessness isn't the right word, but they learn that there's not a need there, and so then even though now it does have a value, they don't see that value. Would you guys agree with that?
Yes, I would say there's more than that though. Like. I think there's a lot of people who've just never been asked to. If you've never been asked to, then it's just weird, right?
Yeah.
Why would you want me to do that? There's also, people for whom it was just going through the motions. And so they don't see the value because it's never worked before. Why is this person asking me to do it again? And then I think that there's the learned helplessness crowd, like you mentioned. But there's also the crowd who are like, I don't want you in my business. And this is a difference in mindset between the military. I mean, it's there in the military. It's just different, right? So in the military, you're not worried about not having a job if you don't add monetary value to the company. People in the private sector are, and like salespeople are definitely like this, right? They want to be protective of their pipeline because their pipeline is connected to their commission and it's also connected to their value as a salesperson. But that can create some reticence to share because, some people are just wired to where like, if like I need to withhold my chips and be a little secretive, but it doesn't do it does a disservice to the company writ large when you do that. But you can't discount the fact that those people are there. That's
great insights on that. And I tell you, I learned something today, and I'm really tickled to death that you connected the dots for me, because I'd never, as much as I've talked about OKRs and Measure What Matters, it's one of the few books on this shelf that I've read more than once. I never put two and two together, OKRs and mission analysis. So that is what I learned today. And look out, Camden.
Yes, sir.
Good thing we have our strategy call this afternoon. So,
Yes, sir.
Camden, what'd you learn?
I learned I'll have an extra cup of coffee before our strategy call. And then the piece of like needing to still be the leader while giving your team the freedom, I think is a really interesting thing that I tend to, whenever I'm in that situation, whether out coaching rugby or in the business of letting people go up, I feel that go of like, oh, I want to be the one who makes the decision, but also I know that's ego and you put that back. And then every now and then I'm out there and I'm just like, okay, but I still want to be the coach. I still want to step up with those. And there is that value of it's like you still have to be able to have that power. If you don't, if you completely step back as the leader, then you're not going to be able to step up when you need to. So I thought that was a really interesting layer of nuance to add to that.
Ashley, how about you, man? What'd you learn?
Well, I learned that you're in one of my favorite books, Team of Teams, which now is funny.
Well, I'm not personally. No, it's not like Joe McChrystal
I know.
Otis.
Lieutenant Colonel Otis McGregor screwed this all up.
He
didn't. One thing I learned, which is interesting, is kind of about the work that you guys are doing and connecting the dots. That there's military and there's civilian, but there's really just people, right? And there are people who are used to doing things one way in the military. There are people who are used to doing things one way in the private sector. But at the end of the day, it's just people. And people organize themselves in small groups and big groups in certain ways. And they organize themselves around tasks in certain ways. And so the commonalities there are just they're fascinating, right? And it's really nice to know that you guys are looking at those same things. Like it's hilarious to me that Measure What Matters is like on your bookshelf right there. It's not clear enough in my like little screen that I can see all the books in the background, but that's great.
Yep. It's there. I do enjoy that book. I really do. And that thought process. That's probably, now I know why, because I just never put two and two together on that. So, Ashley, how do folks find you, learn more about what you got going on, and hire your business?
Yeah, sure. So find me on LinkedIn, just Ashley Thompson. I've got two businesses right now. I've got Fireworks AI, which is actually what my LinkedIn profile says. I need to add Timineer Systems, which is the business I'll represent right now. Timineer Systems does development security operations and cybersecurity for any high security environment. So mostly we work DoD stuff, but healthcare, legal, finance. If there is an environment that needs software applications or needs a development environment in which to build those software applications, we are here to help with that, as well as to help people get ready to work with the government, because that can be a challenge. And you can find us at timoneersystems.com.
Spell that for us.
That's TIMONIER systems. .com. And then you can find us if you want to meet us in person. We'll be out at U.S. Space Force is having an event next week. So they're having an industry day next Wednesday and Thursday. We'll be there both days.
Awesome. That's
the end for anybody in that area.
Yeah, that's the end of October, around Halloween timeframe, folks.
Yeah, it's the 23rd, 24th U.S. Space Force Industry Days over in El Segundo.
Awesome. Good deal. Ashley, thanks for your time today. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you guys. Really appreciate the chance to come and talk with you.
Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Ashley Thompson, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so that they can enjoy it too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again. We'll see you all next time.